When you look at things like that and you think, man, how wonderful is that? The thing that God chose to talk about in chapter 2 was you. And he created you in his image. Tonight we're going to talk about chapter 3, and it is not as wondrous as the first 2 chapters. Because now we get to reality, and if you will, where the rubber meets the road. In chapter 3, we begin with the serpent. And starts in chapter 1, or in verse 1, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made." Well, let's stop right there. How many of you, you don't have to show your hands, but I'll tell you, this is one of those eye-opening things for me. When it said the serpent here, how many of you mind it goes automatically to Satan? I'd always say, yeah, Satan goes to the serpent, right? The word actually, and I can't pronounce it, but the word is actually the word for serpent. In fact, if you think about how this plays out at the end of this, where the serpent gets punished. So he's talking about, you'll eat the dust, you'll crawl on your belly. He's not punishing Satan in that regard. He's punishing the serpent for being a tool of Satan at this point in time. Which, I just never really thought of at that time. Certainly, the serpent is being used by Satan, but he's talking to the serpent. And Satan is using the serpent. You've heard, as we get through this, you'll hear some things that are very familiar. We'll talk about the ways that Eve was tempted. We will talk about how that kind of comes into play nowadays. But it's nothing new, and we're tempted in much the same way today, and we're always quick to say, well, how could Eve fall for that? And hindsight's 20/20, but we fall for the exact same things today. We're just as naive as Eve was in that day. And guys, we're just as naive and sometimes as easily swayed perhaps as Adam was. Because we fall temptation to the same things. And we tend to do it over and over and over again. We don't learn from our mistakes, and they didn't either. One of the things we wonder where, do you ever wonder why Satan tempted Eve and didn't tempt Adam? I never really thought about that. It was interesting to me that why did Satan go to Eve and not go to Adam? One of the things that I studied or referenced suggested that, well, maybe at the time that the command was made not to touch the tree, that Eve wasn't around at the time. And that command had been made to Adam, don't touch the tree, and he had passed it on down to Eve. So maybe she was the more vulnerable because she had not heard that command directly from God. I think sometimes we tend to be a little bit vulnerable, maybe because we haven't heard commands directly from God. We have heard commands directly from God. We just maybe we don't hear that voice. So, there's an indication that Adam and Eve are both somewhat childlike, somewhat naive a little bit. Because remember, they were only given the one command. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I'm not aware that it ever tells where Satan came from. In Job, it talks about, Job, God says to Satan, "Where have you been?" He says, "Walking around." The implication, at least from everything that I've read, and somebody else may want to weigh in on this, but that he's one of the angels that, from all indication, has been around as long as God, perhaps. And I don't know any different. Ed?
Revelation 12 says Satan thrown down. There says there were now war
But so thrown down to earth from heaven is, that's, I guess, when you say, where did he come from? Well, he came from heaven. But where did he come from before that? I don't know, and I don't know that we know. Anything else? It's a good question. I wish we knew the answer to that one. That might help us. The way Satan goes about tempting Eve is a little interesting. 3:1, he said, and he said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Had God told Eve that she could not eat of every tree of the garden? No, that's not what God said. See how Satan twisted that just a little bit? Said, well, I'm sorry, God said that you can't eat of every tree of the garden. Well, what's Eve's immediate reaction? We can eat of all the trees of the garden except this one. And then what does Eve do? She goes to the other extreme. Satan goes to one extreme. Eve goes to the other extreme. Except this tree, and we can't eat of it, and we can't even touch it. Do we see that often in life? Where we were set up by one extreme, and we've therefore now gone to the other extreme. It's a common ploy that Satan uses to tempt us. Anybody in here have an interest in politics? Yeah, nobody will admit it if they do. Do you see that? Do you see that? Where on one side you've got one that goes to one extreme, and if you look at it, that's why our political structure tends to go back and forth, one extreme to another. And they talk about moderates. When was the last time you ever heard of a moderate? It seems to be you're either a radical left or radical right. There are no moderates. It's a ploy that Satan uses here as he talks to Eve. He goes, you can't eat of any tree in the garden. And Eve comes back, and instead of saying, yes, but there's only one that we're not allowed to eat of, she says, and we're not even allowed to touch it. And at that point, what's Satan doing? He says, well, that can't be right, because look, I'm touching it. We don't know that. But at this point, she's painted herself into a corner, because then Satan can just, as a serpent, curl up around that fruit or that tree and say, no, it's not bothering me. Look, I'm fine. I thought you said it would kill me. And so when you start staking off your far left or your far right or your extreme position, you end up kind of painting yourself into a corner, because now Eve is in a little bit of a corner. Did God say, lest you die? Yeah, God did say that. But it's if you eat of the fruit. Now Satan turns back around and he says, and he starts to appeal to Eve's, shall we say, covetousness. What Eve wants. And this is, again, very commonplace. First off, he starts off by saying, oh no, you're not going to die. And I can just see the serpent curled around that tree going, oh no, you're not going to die. Look, you said if I touched it, I'd die. I'm not dead. I'm right here in this tree. Satan appeals to us like that because he says, oh yeah, remember what they told you back in Bible class? Look at me. That's not happening to me. Look at all these people out here in the world who are on television, or great sports figures, or the folks that are doing so well in life. Look how much money this person makes and how much fame this person has, they're not dying. They're looking really good. Look at all that money. Look at how well respected and thought of they are. And we fall for it every time. God says, no, you will surely die. Satan says, well, God didn't really mean that. What God means is that he doesn't want you to be as good as he is. He doesn't want you to know what he knows, and he's trying to hold you back. You hear that one? I think God wants me to be happy. So I'll do what I want to do because God wants me to be happy. God's trying to hold me back because he doesn't want me to be as successful as I could be if I do these things or if I have these things. And that's exactly what Satan told Eve. That's what the serpent told Eve. You know, you're not really going to die. God just doesn't want you to be all that you can be. God doesn't want you to know good from evil. He doesn't want you to be like him. He's holding you down. And we get that same thing. Well, you know, God wants me to be happy. Thoughts that you have? That's right. That's right. But so as far as we know, the only way she knew it was passed down from Adam, right? Right. Do what? She knew it. She knew it from somebody. And at that point in time, it had to be either Adam or God. So there were only two sources she could get it from.
You know, I have a hard time blaming Eve because, you know, God created Adam and Eve, and they had complete 100% trust in him.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that provided for them, took care of them, and looked after them. And here comes the serpent. They had no reason to deny or what God said because they trusted him 100%.
Sure.
And so here comes the serpent. It says, you know, do you have any rules? Yeah. The only rule is we can eat from the tree, touch the tree. And what does he say? No, that's not true.
That's right.
Look, I can do it. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. And there was no reason for them to doubt at all. And that's when doubt came.
Yeah.
And then it caused Satan. Satan's the one that caused them distrust. There's no reason whatsoever to fault Eve other than she should have gone and asked God, right? He could have cleared it up. But
Well, other than the fact that God had already, and she knew the only command she had was not to eat of that tree. She knew that. And we have those, I mean, that unfortunately that's not the only command we have nowadays because of the repercussions of what Eve did. But to your point, they were in a very trusting relationship and unfortunately fell victim to the serpent, who was much more crafty than any beast of the field.
so people always say, well, it's fault. Well, you know, it's not her fault. The fault came from Satan. And it's the same thing in our lives now. That's where the sin.
Sure.
You know, he's the one that tempts us.
He does, but let's not abdicate our responsibility that we have to resist that temptation. So, and this is where Eve was. She was tempted, yes, and it's Satan's fault that she was tempted, and the serpent, I hate to say this, but the serpent's something of an innocent party in all this too, because he was used by Satan. So,
For us, we have the examples, right?
Yep.
I don't know what example Eve had. Maybe she didn't have it. I don't know.
other than she knew that she was not supposed to do that. And sometimes that's all we have. We know what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do, Bill.
I suspect from reading the scriptures that God created Adam and Eve and did so that they could choose. Okay. We all have a choice. So in their minds, they made a choice, and it was not what God had said. And so we paid the price when we don't follow God's. It's our own fault, my estimation, if we don't choose right path, because it's right here in front of us.
That's exactly right. And I think that is when it talks about man being made in God's image, that's one of the things that is in God's image, the ability to choose. If you look, most creatures don't really have, it's an instinct. They have to do this, they have to do that. We have the ability of choice. We have the ability to discern what we can do, to reason. Most creatures don't have reasoning capabilities like that. So I think that's one of the things when it talks about being made in God's image is our ability to choose. Other thoughts? Rocky?
I couldn't hear everything that was going on because the voices were going that way, except for repeat something that somebody's already said, because I couldn't hear it. But one of the things we have to note is that Satan impugn God's motives, and we're not told everything. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us everything. We don't know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden before this happened. We don't know how many conversations that God had with Adam and Eve, because we're given bits of information. We're not given the totality of everything that happened. So, I mean, they should have known just from their dealings with God that they should have known what his nature was. And that's what Satan was doing. He was impugning God's nature. Saying, God doesn't want you to do this because you'll be smart like he is.
Yep.
And God doesn't want you to be that way. So that was really the root cause of the sin. And it wasn't, she did what God told her not to do, but she didn't trust God. That's what it all boiled down to. She didn't trust God.
And it's in
Not trusting God. And Paul tells us later in one of his writings, Eve was deceived, and Adam wasn't. So she was truly tricked by this. She wasn't thinking, but she should have known better. And that's how Satan works. He's a deceiver. He deceives us into believing things that are not true. And so, they of all people, there wasn't any other people around. They knew they were there because God had created them.
And they, from all indications, they walked with God. In other words, the concept of after this is over, after the temptation, after they've sinned, God comes walking through the garden in the cool of the evening or in the windy part of the evening, where it's the indication is that they had a personal relationship with God, and to still fall prey to the wiles of Satan, if you will, we're going to run into the same thing. Bill?
Another thought strikes me. Scriptures tell us that God will not allow us to be tempted beyond our ability to withstand. So, it's not like I can't control it.
That's right. This was not a situation where Satan twisted Eve's arm or whatever and said, "Oh, you have no choice." This was look how neat this. It's the same things that we fall prey to, and we're going to get into this in a little bit. That's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And it's everything that we fall prey to falls into one of those categories. And that's exactly what happened to Eve. And he hit her with all three of them.
Necessity of paying attention to the truth of God. And there's the temptation, and we think of it as a necessity to satisfy, this looks good. But it's always a test.
That's right.
We really get to appreciate self-control
Mm-hmm.
with God's blessing, with prayer and so on. You get to appreciate, and what's great about it is if you don't get into temptation, your relationship with God is really strong. And
And you mentioned about not giving in to temptation. That's a learned skill. That's something you have to exercise on a regular basis, because it's like anything else. If your default is to give in to temptation, then the more you do that, the less likely you are to resist temptation. It's like anything else in life. Once you create a habit, then breaking that habit becomes all the more difficult. And learning to break that is.
Temptation is like an itch. You have to learn not to scratch it.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's good. That's exactly right.
I know the Bible doesn't tell us everything, and I don't mean this to be humorous, but I always think of a serpent as something scary, and much less a serpent that's going to speak to you. There's always a problem with that. Like,
Yeah.
how
You know-
she's or if she's had a relationship and trusted in the speaking serpent.
As far as, and again, I'm maybe taking a little bit of a leap here, but it may very well be that the serpent was not scary prior to the pronouncement of God that I will create enmity between you and the woman. He could talk about that in the physical sense and or the spiritual sense. So there may have been that. I don't know that for sure. To your point, we don't have all the answers. A speaking serpent, on the other hand, I'm with you. I'm not sure where that you would think. That should have been a clue, don't you think? So, if you ever feel like you're being tempted, if you're talking to a serpent, there's a good chance that you want to turn around and run, right? Good point. Rocky?
I don't recall the person the brother that wrote this, but it's in some of the information I sent you on that. But there's another possibility here. If you look to the chapter here, nowhere does it use the word Satan.
That's right.
It's always using the word serpent.
Yep.
And yet there's other references in the Bible where it refers to Satan as a serpent.
As the great serpent.
So it's entirely possible that this is not talking about a physical serpent at all, but it's using a description of Satan. He calls him a serpent because later on when he issues, when he talks about, people don't walk on you, and so forth,
Yeah.
crawl in the dust of the ground. What sense would it make to do that to an animal who had no control over what he was doing? That would make no sense at all for God to say that. But in using figurative language, he's saying, Satan, you may have tried at this particular moment, but you're going to be subjugated and you're going to be controlled because Christ is later going to come and put an end to all this. And I think that's maybe more in line with what's being said here, because if they talked to God who they couldn't see, then it wouldn't be maybe so far-fetched to talk to some spirit being, Satan, and maybe he manifest himself in some form where they could see him or something. But they hadn't established all of the norms that we have, where they would say, well, this is just out of the ordinary, because at that particular time they were learning what ordinary was.
That's true. There wasn't a whole lot of ordinary at that point in time, was there? To your point, could it have been Satan manifest, or a description of Satan as opposed to the serpent? It would seem to imply, as it talks to verse 1, that Satan, or that the serpent is talking about an earthly serpent from the standpoint the serpent was more crafty than anything that God had made. So it would seem to imply that this also was made by God. But
Characteristic of how Satan operates.
That's true.
He's very subtle.
yeah,
He didn't come in, he didn't take a direct approach, he took a
Sure.
behind. I'm going to attack you from behind and trick you, and that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Talking about something.
Is there something hidden that we don't see about God making all the animals before he made Eve?
if it's hidden that we don't see, I have no idea. It's entirely possible. And I don't know. I don't know. All right, let's move on. We're getting behind here. as I mentioned, here's what the woman saw. So these are the same temptations that Satan uses on us today. And I can't see that, so I'm going to have to look at my notes so I can get them in order. So in 3:6, he says, she saw that it was good for food. So there you go, lust of the flesh. Maybe she had been eating all these other fruits of the garden and she was ready for something new. Well, that does look pretty good. I bet that'd be tasty. So there was a certain amount of good for food. There's lust of the flesh. How does Satan hit us with lust of the flesh? It's probably not some kind of fruit generally. Sexual immorality? Is that one of them? Maybe covetousness. Is that one? Like I say, you see all these people out there that are doing so well, and they, every third word is foul language, but they're making money hand over fist and seem to be doing better than just about anybody. We'd really like some of that. That'd be awesome. Think about all that money and security, and that's all lust of the flesh. It's lust of the flesh. And then it was good that it was pleasant to look at. I can imagine the tree of knowledge of good and evil was a beautiful tree. I don't know what kind of fruit it is. We could take a vote. I guess the world would suggest that it's an apple. I don't think so, but that might be what you hear about all the time is that apple that Eve ate. Well, we don't know that. But it looked really good. It's beautiful. You have that. My wife makes some dishes that just look great. And we're given the opportunity, and we're this is kind of what Eve sees. Oh man, that's pretty. I want some of that. That's beautiful. We get the same thing. Satan still tempts us with, the lust of the eyes, the things that we can see, the things that we're drawn to. And then finally, that it was desirable to make one wise. And I think this is the one that ultimately got to Eve. Because what did Satan, to Rocky's point, he had impugned God's motives. Satan had. What had Satan gotten to Eve? What did he tell Eve? What is it that's going to happen to you when you eat this? You'll be like God. You'll be as wise as God. You'll know good from evil. I think we run into this now a lot from, we've talked about humanism in the past, secular humanism. And in that scenario, who is God? Us. We are. So isn't that exactly what Satan is doing here? You'll become like God. You'll become humanist. Okay.
These categories of temptation, what ends up is pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. If you knew that when I was a young man, I committed adultery.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think about the fact that it was the sheriff's wife. I didn't think about the fact that he was going to come after me with a .357 Magnum. But what I did think about when he came after me with the .357 Magnum, and the only reason I'm here is his brother stood between him and me. I only felt good enough to die. That's the interesting thing. Sin, the end result of sin, the pride is gone.
Mm-hmm.
The fear was gone. Reality was, I felt only good enough to die. And by the grace of God, I'm still here. And we did become friends again.
Uh-huh.
But all of that was because of lust, but pride is involved in it. And destruction is the end result. It destroyed a lot of things doing that one thing.
But all of these things do, and that's where, when we fall victim to sin and to temptation, the end result is always the same. And it's the same as what Eve experienced. Yeah, Eve did not experience physical death at that exact moment. When Satan handed her that piece of fruit and she took it in her hand, she probably was thinking, well, I didn't die either. So far, so good. And then she took one bite and she still didn't die. And at that point, maybe God was pulling the wool over my eyes. And she gave some to Adam. So, the woman saw that it was good for food, equates to lust of the flesh, that it was pleasant to the eyes, which was the lust of the eyes, and desirable to make one wise, or equal with God, the pride of life. Other thoughts that you have?
If you could take your hand and cover up my right, your left. Every one of those things you got listed there, there's nothing wrong with them in and of themselves, but it's how you use them. And that's where the deception comes in, because God made us with physical bodies that have physical desires, have physical needs, have physical abilities. But we have to control those desires and needs and how we fulfill those desires in the manner that God prescribes, because God prescribes them in a way that's not hurtful to ourselves or to other people. And it's the wrongful fulfilling of those desires is where sin comes in, and that's what makes it so tricky.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that I read, and again, I don't do Hebrew or Greek or anything along those lines, but one of the things, the word that's used in conjunction with this is a word that tends to be used as part of a term for covetousness. In other words, it was things that she wanted. It was a desire that she wanted, she coveted the ability to be equal with God. And so it's an overwhelming desire where she was now, her attitude had changed to the point that it was a problem when she fell victim to temptation. That's exactly right. That's right. And there's nothing wrong with beauty. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. It's how we perceive them and how we react to them. All right. And she took of its fruit and ate. Now, like I say, I think you can envision Eve taking whatever piece of fruit that is and realizing, oh, I've touched it, but I have not died. And thinking, okay, I'm all right. I'm good. This is good. And then she takes a bite of it, and she's still alive. But she also gave to her husband, and he ate. And then it says their eyes were opened. They realized that they were naked. And then they tried to cover their nakedness. Up to this point, I kind of envision, you guys have had little kids. Some of you were even little kids at some point, I'm sure. But as a little kid, do they have any fear of nakedness? Oh my goodness. We had to go get our oldest out of the backyard one time, running around out there just naked as a jaybird. And this is, how old was he, about 3 or 4? 2, 3 or 4? Oh, never mind. He had a pillowcase tied around his waist. But we asked him, what are you doing? You can't run around out like this. He said, well, Adam and Eve did. Okay. Let him go. But that's kind of how I envision, they're running around. They don't realize, because they don't know good and evil yet. They do not understand good and evil. They do not know, and at this time, it is not inappropriate for them to run around without clothes on. And then their eyes were opened, and their relationship with God has changed. And now there's a gap there where they once walked with God. They now realize something's not right. Shirley?
I have a question about, she also, she took some of it and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her. I mean, did he walk up during this interchange?
I have no idea. And we're not told, other than, Eve was the one that was tempted, but was Adam right there during the temptation, or did he walk up at the time that we don't know that? He did eat some of it. And apparently he knew that it was fruit he was not supposed to be eating. There is indication there that he knew what he was doing when he took some of it. And maybe it's the same sort of thing. That's right. And maybe it's the same thing we just talked about, that, Eve didn't die when she ate it, so I guess it's fine for me to eat it, right? That's another thing that we tend to fall in. Well, this person was fine. They didn't have a problem. They jumped, if you jumped off the bridge, did you?
About the knowledge of good and evil, you have to kind of think deep about that, because people, Adam and Eve had the ability to choose between right and wrong, so they clearly had the ability to be able to recognize right and wrong. Otherwise, God couldn't hold them responsible for doing that. So I think when you look at it, why did he call the tree that? I think it has to be like in a practical sense that when you eat of that tree, you know evil because you've experienced evil, because you have violated God's law and you've now done something. So it's not like all of a sudden we know what's right and what's wrong now. They knew what was right and wrong to begin with, but now they have experienced firsthand wrong. Now this, obviously God did something different to them so that they could realize
That they were naked.
Bad state.
Yeah.
Because there was no verbal teaching of them like that. It's just boom, all of a sudden we realize we're naked. Is right. And it was just them. It was just husband and wife. There wasn't nobody else in the world, and yet they felt embarrassed about that. So God had to have done something miraculously or something to their thinking. But they clearly knew they had done wrong. They had the ability to choose right and wrong before.
Well, it says that their eyes were open. So to your point, something happened when they ate of that tree, and God caused something to happen for them to recognize something beyond just that single command that they had violated. So it went much further, their knowledge, if you will, or their discernment went much further than it had been up to that point. Folks, I think we're out of time.
People say when they get on drugs, cocaine, like that, before now they can't resist.
Kind of had their mind expanded, if you will. Wasn't that what they said in the 60s? I was too young to remember that. Thank you all once again. I did not get through this, so we'll finish this up next week.